Good afternoon, and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome. For everyone returning, welcome back. Today, we are going to be delving into cold cases solved by internet sleuths. Since the beginning of the internet, people have been using their skills, time, and effort into helping police agencies solve crime. Their genuine interest in these cases keep the cases alive. They dedicate innumerable hours to these cases, crowdsourcing skills. They use various social media platforms to breathe life into case files no one else is looking into, and use their voices to speak on behalf of these lost cases. The catch? They aren't police investigators. They're everyday, average people, searching through crime files in their spare time, in hopes of helping to solve cold cases. Let's get into it. Number 1. Grateful Doe. Grateful Doe was a young male estimated to have been between the ages of 15 and 21 years of age at the time of his death. He was found in the passenger side of a VW Vanagon on the side of a road on Route 58 West. The vehicle had hit a pair of trees, and neither he nor the driver of the vehicle had been wearing seat belts. The accident occurred in 1995, and the driver had been quickly identified as Michael Hager. The passenger, however, had no identification on him. He only had 2 scalped Grateful Dead concert tickets, $1 in quarters, and a yellow Bic lighter. He was given the name because he was wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt, as well as the tickets. It was thought by police that Grateful Doe was hitchhiking, and Michael Hager picked him up because he'd been wearing a Grateful Dead t-shirt, because Hager had also liked the band. Neither young men had drugs or alcohol in their system, and police theorized that Hager had fallen asleep at the wheel. Grateful Doe had severe lacerations on his face, thus a post-mortem photograph wasn't released to the public. They input his fingerprints, but they never had any results. There had been a note recovered from the scene that said, "Jason, sorry, we had to go. See you around. Call me." Then there was a number, and it was signed Carolyn T. and Carolyn O. The police attempted to locate the Carolyns, but because the number had no area code, it was a near impossible task. Grateful Doe had brown eyes, long curly brown or a darker blonde hair color that had recently been colored red. He had a star tattoo on his upper left arm and another faded tattoo on his right arm. He had been wearing a beaded necklace, had his left ear pierced but wasn't wearing an earring, and had a scar on his back. He had been cross-referenced with over 200 missing persons, but never found a match. In 2013, police had released a digital reconstruction of Grateful Doe, and in 2014, the website Web Sleuths put out a massive social media campaign to attempt to get the case solved before the 20th anniversary of his death. The campaign had his digital image shared on Imgur, Reddit, and on Grateful Dead forums, BuzzFeed, and local media. The mantra was simple: we just need to get this to be seen at the right place, at the right time, by the right eyes. The social media blitz was successful, and 2 men replied having known Grateful Doe as teens, and were able to get the post to his family. January 13th, 2015, Margaretta Evans posted on the Grateful Doe Facebook page, "OMG, this is my son." Grateful Doe was officially identified as Jason Callahan. He had left home on June 1st to follow a Grateful Dead summer tour. He was 18 when he left home and hadn't even made it 4 weeks into the summer tour before the accident. He was never declared missing because his family had wanted to believe he had just picked up and started a life somewhere. After nearly 20 years, it hadn't been the news Margaretta wanted to hear. Police credit the site Web Sleuths for organizing a successful social media campaign that had served its purpose to find someone who knew him. Number 2. Jacob Wetterling. Jacob was 11 years old in 1989. He was from St. Joseph, Minnesota, and October 22nd, he was abducted. He had been out biking with his younger brother and his friend Aaron Larson at around 9 p.m. They had gone to a corner store only 4 blocks from their home to rent a movie. Before they had went out, they had called their parents, who were at a dinner party, to ask their mother for permission to go out. She adamantly said no because it was already dark and she was concerned cars wouldn't be able to see them biking. When they hung up the phone, they revised their plan and spoke to their father, telling him they would have flashlights and wear reflective vests. Their father felt it was a well-thought-out plan, and since it was the 3 of them, he said it was fine. On their way back, on a particularly dark stretch of road, a man in dark clothing and a mask jumped out of a driveway. He had a revolver and ordered the boys to throw their bikes into the ditch and lie face down on the ground. The boys complied. Then the masked man asked each boy to give him their ages. Jacob's younger brother was told to run to a nearby wooded area and not to turn around or he would be shot. He next demanded the remaining boys show him their faces. Then he told Aaron to run into the woods and not look back or he would be shot. Then he grabbed Jacob by the elbow and began dragging him away. This was the last time Jacob was seen. The 2 boys sprinted home, 911 was called, and their parents were contacted. Within 6 minutes of the 911 call, a sheriff's deputy was on the scene. When he found the boys' bikes, he immediately called for backup. Additionally, the FBI were alerted. Throughout the night, Jacob was searched for, and over the next few days, the search began to dwindle with no suspects or evidence. The case quickly went cold. Joy Baker had been 32 when Jacob had been abducted. She remembered the missing posters, the ongoing theories, the pleas of Jacob's mother on TV to bring him home, and it had haunted her. She often thought back on it as she raised her own children. 2 decades had passed since Jacob's abduction when she started blogging about her investigation. She had heard of a man who had come forward with a story that was eerily similar to Jacob's abduction. Jared Shirel had been 12 when he was walking home from a local cafe in Cold Spring, Minnesota, only 12 miles from St. Joseph's. A man in a car slowed down and asked him for directions. When Jared stopped walking to point, the man grabbed him and pulled him inside his vehicle. He was driven to a remote area and sexually assaulted. The man drove him back into town and asked him repeatedly if he recognized him. When Jared said no, he let him out of the vehicle and told him to run, and if he looked back, he would be shot. The traumatic incident had happened 9 months before Jared's abduction, and it made Joy think that maybe the man in the attacks was the same. Investigators on the case had told her they were unrelated and were convinced so. Baker pursued every lead available to her and then some. She reached out to Jared and the 2 began to piece evidence together, and they found more unsolved sexual assaults involving young boys in the area. Each boy said the same thing about the man. He had told them to run or I'll blow your head off or something similar. Baker alerted the Stearns County Sheriff's Office, who had told them they had never heard of these assaults, but didn't believe they were connected to Jacob. Joy and Jared spent hours, hundreds of hours, searching for the other victims and getting their stories straight from the source. They relentlessly harassed the county sheriff's office. They did interviews with local media. They involved Jacob's mother. The story was featured on John Walsh's CNN TV show, The Hunt. This was the final media push that made the FBI take action and relaunched the investigation. DNA evidence that had been collected from Jared's sexual assault was retested in 2015, and it hit a match: Danny James Heinrich. Although the statute of limitations were up for his case, he couldn't be charged with Jared's assault, and a search led to the discovery of child pornography in Heinrich's home. Heinrich was offered a plea deal, and part of the deal was to reveal the location of Jacob's body. He accepted, and on September 1st, 2016, he led investigators to the burial site. On September 3rd, an announcement was made that Jacob's body had been found and identified. Unfortunately, the plea bargain meant that Heinrich would only be charged for the child pornography possession, and he would serve a maximum sentence of 20 years in a federal medical center in Massachusetts. Joy Baker and Jared Sherrill were the reason the FBI reopened the investigation. Jacob's mother publicly thanked the pair for their dedication to see this crime through to the end. Joy blogged the entire experience, and I will link her blog in the description box below. Number 3. Lyle Steve Ik. On September 16, 2001, a young man in his early 20s checked into a motel in the state of Washington. He was checked in under the name Lyle Steve Ik, which was an alias most likely derived from the book You Must Remember This, where the Steve Ik character contemplates suicide. His body was discovered by housekeeping the following day. He had hung himself in a closet with his belt. When he had checked in the previous day, he had only paid for one night, and when he was discovered on a nightstand was $160 with a note that said, "For the room." Steve Ik had no luggage with him, only a toothbrush and toothpaste were found in the room. He had no identification, no bank cards, no driver's license. He was 6'2", but only weighed 140 pounds. His clothing hung off him loosely, making police think that he had lost a lot of weight recently. Detectives asked around locally to see if anyone had seen or interacted with the young man, or if any of the bus drivers had dropped him off near the motel. No leads, no missing person report matching his description. His dental records and fingerprints were run through all FBI databases and no matches. The name Lyle Steve Ik wasn't in any records, from a phone book to data census records. The address he had given was a Best Western in the next town over, which, according to them, he had never stayed at. Lyle Steve Ik's case, like so many others, had gone cold quickly, although in his case, he had gone out of his way to make his identification challenging. His death had come right after 9/11, and it had been theorized that he may have been involved with the 9/11 terror attacks. He had become a somewhat popular subject on the website Reddit, where people shared theories but also spent hours trying to find his identity. They had put together a fundraiser to have his DNA tested, and the DNA Doe Project stepped in to help. He was identified after 17 years. His family was notified, and they decided to keep his identity withheld for privacy. It was confirmed, however, he had been a runaway, estranged from his family and struggling with mental health issues. He had been from California and was 25 when he died. His family had never reported his missing due to the estrangement. Some people in the Reddit community, at its highest point, the subreddit had over 4,000 people strong, felt it was hard to move on after the mystery was over. They had committed so much time and emotional investment in Lyle's investigation that it was hard to believe it was time to move on. A moderator for the subreddit thread was quoted as saying, "It was a group of individuals working towards something really amazing, and yes, it was all worth it." Number 4. Griffith Park, Jane Doe. In the early morning hours on June 8, 1968, a young woman was found slumped over on a park bench in Griffith Park, Los Angeles, California. Initially thought to be sleeping, the petite woman with bleach blonde hair was discovered to have died of an apparent drug overdose. Authorities noted she seemed well put together. She had manicured nails, freshly colored and styled hair, and had very uniquely shaped eyebrows. She was wearing a red and white polka dot bikini with a light overcoat and sandals. She looked like she had just walked off the beach. She had no identification, and the only jewelry she was wearing was a plain gold wedding band with the inscription CB to EJ 9420. Police had been certain that someone would be able to identify the young woman, but they were surprised when no one came to claim her. Police found she'd been staying at a nearby motel, and she had been using the name Cheryl Miller. They couldn't find anything connecting her to that name and gave her the identification number Jane Doe number 18. She remained unidentified for 48 years. In 2010, Carl Kopelman was sent her file from the Doe Network. He was instantly drawn to her black and white post-mortem photo. He said that she had looked like Marilyn Monroe. Carl was a moderator on the website Sleuths and was the first to do a reconstruction of the Griffith Park Jane Doe. Once the image was generated, he had posted it to his Facebook page. A former colleague and friend of Kopelman, Rita Ellen Hood, was on her lunch break, and while scrolling through Facebook, she saw Kopelman's post on the Jane Doe. He had included all identifiable information in the case, and Rita had become fixated on the ring with the inscription. She had noted that she had a similar inscription on her own wedding band. She went home that night and logged into the popular genealogy site Ancestry.com and began poring over records, trying to find a marriage license that matched the initials and the date. Once her family would go to bed, the mother of two would continue doing the obsessive search for 4 weeks until she found a Charles J. Bush who married a Edna Lydia J. in Detroit, Michigan on September 4th, 1920. Finding this, she delved into Edna Bush's history. Edna had passed in 1932 of ill health when she was only 30 years old, but left behind 2 daughters. One of her daughters, Geraldine Bush, had married John Paul Manzo, and via Facebook, she found someone she'd hoped was their son. She messaged John Manzo Jr. on September 9th to ask him if he was related to Edna Bush and if Geraldine was his mother. 2 days later, Manzo confirmed that Edna had been his grandmother and his late mother was Geraldine Bush. Rita then asked if he knew who had been in possession of his grandmother's wedding band because a Jane Doe had turned up in California. He responded back with 2 words, "Call me." He and Rita were both nervous on the call, and he had said his sister had been missing since 1968. Rita shared all the information she had on the Jane Doe, and John was sure Jane Doe was his sister, Cheryl McMillan. Cheryl had been 15 years older than John. She had been the result of their mother's first marriage. John had been from her third. He remembered her faintly but fondly. He said that he had fond memories of Cheryl and their cousin taking him to the beach to meet boys. He remembered his big sister being doting and spoiled him. Cheryl had moved to Los Angeles after high school and had moved to California on a scholarship for UCLA. She had lost contact with her family at one point, and her mother had hired a private investigator. The investigator had found her, and she told him to tell them I'm fine. John had been told by relatives that his mother had filed a missing persons report, but when Rita Hood had contacted him, he looked into it, and police couldn't find any reports on his sister. He had also begun speaking with other relatives, and a cousin had given some details she had previously withheld. His cousin Ellen had been very close to Cheryl as they were close in age, and she had spoken to her right before her disappearance. Ellen said that Cheryl had missed a dress fitting for her wedding, and when she spoke to her about it, Cheryl promised that she would not miss the wedding, reassuring her that she was the maid of honor and nothing would stop her from attending. But Ellen knew something was different with Cheryl. When Ellen had last visited her, she was introduced to new friends of Cheryl's. She had also been dating a new guy with the last name Miller. that Ellen felt was bad news. Cheryl had confided in Ellen that she was being used as a drug mule to bring product from Mexico into California. Ellen had assumed that Cheryl's disappearance had been a result of her running drugs. Ellen knew that Cheryl had been using drugs for some years before 1968 and wasn't surprised she had died of an overdose. Her younger brother, although saddened by the confirmation that his sister would never come back, he was also grateful for the knowledge that she hadn't simply abandoned him wordlessly. He was also glad that she had never pawned off their grandmother's wedding ring, because if she had, she never would have been identified. Although police had no DNA to confirm, Cheryl had been cremated. Using photographs and family members' positive identifications, they confidently stated that Cheryl McMillan was the Griffith Park Jane Doe, and she had died in 1968 at the age of 21. After the identification, John and Rita met in person, and John said that he considers Rita to be a part of the family, and is grateful that she was able to make the connection. These cases prove that everyday, normal people can help solve cold cases. They are proving every week that if a story ends up in front of the right person at the right time, that someone can shed new light or bring new evidence into the forefront that could lead to a case being solved. There is also something that can be said about crowdsourcing for new leads in a case. When you're working on anything, it can be easy to get tunnel vision, and sometimes a fresh pair of eyes is needed to look at something from a different angle. With that being said, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please give this a thumbs up if you like the content, and subscribe for more if you haven't already. If you've done all that and you want to support me and the channel, I've linked a couple donation options in my description box. All earnings generated go back into the channel to upgrade equipment, software, and resources to make the channel and content better. Thank you all for your support. I appreciate it greatly, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.